Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're continuing to learn halachos Chol HaMoed, and we will be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. We're beginning today a very interesting Siman, and it's something that comes up very often on Chol HaMoed and people have a lot of questions about, and that is the question of writing on Chol HaMoed, Ksiva on Chol HaMoed. What are you allowed to write? What are you not allowed to write? When are you allowed to write? When are you not allowed to write? So let's begin this Siman. We begin on the bottom of Tes Vav Amud Beis. Siman Tov Kuf Mem Hey. Dine Ksiva b'Chol HaMoed. The halachos that govern writing on Chol HaMoed. Uba Yud Aleph Seifim. And here we are going to have 11 Seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph. And this Sif is actually quite a complex Sif. Let's start. The Mechaber says in Sif Aleph, Aser lichtov b'Chol HaMoed. You're not allowed to write on Chol HaMoed. That, of course, is the beginning of the conversation. The beginning of the conversation is that Ksiva is one of the Lamites Malachas. Ksiva is a Malacha Gemura. It's a full-fledged Malacha. And therefore, even though there's really no tircha involved in writing, still in all, since it's a Malacha Gemura, writing is forbidden on Chol HaMoed. Aser lichtov b'Chol HaMoed. Continues the Mechaber, Va'afilu lahagia ois achas b'sefer. Even if you want to be magia, one letter, you want to fix one letter in a sefer, and over here the Mechaber is drawing his language from a Mishnah Berurah Katan, and the Mishnah Berurah Katan is discussing a Sefer Torah. So I'm going to translate the Mechaber as if he's coming directly from the Mishnah. Va'afilu lahagia ois achas b'sefer, even to fix up and to correct one letter in a Sefer Torah. Now, writing in a Sefer Torah is definitely a Maaseh Uman. That's definitely something that takes the skill and the patience of a craftsman, right? You don't go ahead and just write in a Sefer Torah. You get an Uman. You go to a Sefer to write in a Sefer Torah. So, afilu lahagia ois achas b'sefer, even to correct one letter in a Sefer Torah, which is a Maaseh Uman, aser, is forbidden on Chol HaMoed. Now, let's analyze this for a second. Generally speaking, when we deal with a Sefer Torah, we're usually discussing a Sefer Torah in the shul. Who owns that Sefer Torah? Even if the Sefer Torah is owned by an individual, right? A lot of times you have Sifrei Torah in the shul that are really owned by individuals, and those individuals place the Sefer Torah in the shul so that it should be used for the tzibur. Then you have other Sifrei Torah that are actually owned by the tzibur. But even an individual's Sefer Torah that is in the shul and it's being used by the tzibur, you would think that to correct that Sefer has the status of tzarchei rabbim, right? Because it's something that's used by the rabbim. It's tzarchei rabbim. So if it's tzarchei rabbim, it becomes easier to be matir malacha on Chol HaMoed l'tzarech rabbim. But the problem over here, the Mishnah Berurah is going to say, is that over here there's no tzarchei moed. We're talking about a case where you have a typical shul nowadays that has multiple Sifrei Torah. And if there are multiple Sifrei Torah, there's no tzarech hamoed to fix this Sefer Torah now. Don't use this Sefer Torah. Use a different Sefer Torah. Indeed, I think it's brought down over here even... Where did I see it? I thought I saw it in a Sharet Zion. Maybe I'll come up with it later. That even if you took out the Sefer and you found a mistake in the Sefer now, I think we're going to see it. Even if you took out the Sefer now and you found a mistake in the Sefer now, don't fix it. Take out a different Sefer Torah. So when we're talking about being magia a Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed, we're talking about something where there is no tzarech hamoed and it's a Maaseh Uman. So even if it's a tzarech rabbim, we said that when something is a tzarech for the rabbim, you could do a Maaseh Hedyot, even if it's not a tzarech hamoed. But you could only do a Maaseh Uman if it's a tzarech hamoed and it's a tzarech rabbim. Over here, this is not a tzarech hamoed. Put the Sefer Torah away. Therefore, and this is the way I'm learning Pshat in the Mishnah Berurah, we'll read it inside soon. Therefore, over here, the Mechaber says, to be Magia a Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed is Aser, because you're doing something which is a Maaseh Uman, but it's not a Tzarech HaRabim, even though it may be a Tzarech HaRabim. It's not a Tzarech HaMoed, even though it may be a Tzarech HaRabim. So Aser Lichter b'Chol HaMoed, v'afil lagia ois achas b'Sefer Aser. Okay, we said a lot. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah inside now. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. Va'afilu lahagia. Now it's a little tricky. The way I'm learning Pshat in this Mishnah Berurah, you might tell me that it's a Chiddush, but I think it's very clear that that's what the Mishnah Berurah means. So we have to read this Mishnah Berurah carefully. Why can't you be Magia a letter in the Sefer Torah? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Lefi she'ein zeh tzarech hamoed, because there's no tzarech hamoed over here. V'loi mikri tzarche rabim, and therefore you cannot, it's not called tzarche rabim. Now what does that mean that it's not called tzarche rabim? It definitely is tzarche rabim, because the Sefer Torah is something which is used by the rabbim. So therefore repairing a Sefer Torah that's used by the rabbim is tzarche rabim. So what does the Mishnah Berurah mean when he says v'loi mikri tzarche rabim? What the Mishnah Berurah means over here, I believe, is you cannot employ the heter of tzarche rabim. Normally there's a heter of tzarche rabim, which in certain cases allows you to perform even a Maaseh Uman on Chol HaMoed. When is that? When something is tzarche rabim and is tzarech hamoed. If it's tzarche rabim and it's tzarech hamoed, then you could do a Maaseh Uman. But if it's tzarche rabim and it's not tzarech hamoed, then you're only allowed to do a Maaseh Hedyet. You're not allowed to do a Maaseh Uman. And over here, we're talking about Safras. Safras is a Maaseh Uman. Therefore, what the Mishnah Berurah says is, you know why you can't be Magia an ois in the Sefer Torah? Lefi she'ein zeh tzarech hamoed, because this is not a tzarech hamoed, v'loi mikri tzarche rabim, and therefore it's not considered the type of tzarche rabim that gives you a heter to do a Maaseh Uman. And the Mishnah Berurah continues, why is it not tzarche moed? Kevan sheyesh lehem sefer achal likros by. Because we're talking about a case where they have another Sefer Torah that they could learn from. That's why the Mishnah Berurah is explaining, that's why it's not tzarche moed. And since it's not tzarche moed, you can't employ the heter of tzarche rabim to be mater the Maaseh Uman of doing Safras to be Magia letter in the Sefer Torah. Oh, and now continues the Chavetz Chaim with what I was looking for before. Va'afilu matzah toz b'moed, even if you found a mistake in the Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed. So you took the Sefer Torah out, you took it to the bima, the Balkaira is laning, and he found a mistake. Aser, you're still not allowed to go ahead and be Magiyat. Says the Sharet Tzion in Ois Cotton Bays, Va'afilu be'eis hakriya, even if this happened during the laning. So you took out a Sefer Torah, you put it on the bima, you had the first aliyah, the Balkaira is laning, and he sees a mistake. Still, you're not allowed to go be Magiyat. Still, your rabbi says instead you take out another Sefer Torah because you have no heter to perform the Maaseh Uman of writing Safras in the Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed. It's not a tzarech hamoed, so there's no heter. Okay. Now, there's an interesting Sharet Tzion over here. Sharet Tzion Ois Cotton Aleph that I would draw your attention to. Just an interesting Sharet Tzion. The Chavetz Chaim says over here, Umashma midivrei HaBeis Yosef, it's implied from the words of the Beis Yosef on the Torah, Denokat Ledina, that he paskins lahalacha, Da'afilo HaSefer Torah hu shaloi, even if somebody owns his own personal Sefer Torah, V'tikunoi hu l'tzarech atzmai, and he wants to fix the Sefer for his own purposes. Dal yidei zeh yesh lo Sefer Torah kshera. Why is he fixing it? Because he wants his Sefer Torah to be kosher. Why does he want his Sefer Torah to be kosher? Because kol zman he owns a kosher Sefer Torah, he's being mekayim the mitzvah of having a Sefer Torah. So he wants to be magia the Sefer l'tzarech mitzvah for his own mitzvah. Now that's a tzarech hamoed because I have this mitzvah is upon me right now on the moed, Right now, I'm not getting a mitzvah because the Sefer Torah is not kosher. If I'm be magia it, I'm going to have a kosher Sefer Torah. Says the Sharitzian, Gam kein asur l'sakin mamayid. You're still not allowed to fix the Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed, according to the Beis Yosef. Udaloi kahara, and this is against the psak of the Ra'ah, who holds that you are allowed to. And the Chavetz Chaim says, V'loi oven atam. The Chavetz Chaim says, I don't understand the tam. I don't know why this is asur. The Maishna miksivas mezuzah. Why is this different than writing a mezuzah? The mutter lichtayv l'tzarech atzmai shetzarech labamayid l'kulei alma, which we're going to see later on, probably in tomorrow's shir, that you're allowed to write a mezuzah on Chol HaMoed to have a mezuzah for the mitzvah. The svir, I'm going to skip the brackets. V'haloi hacha gamkein. Over here, when somebody owns a personal Sefer Torah and he wants to be magiyat to make it kosher, if the Sefer Torah is missing a letter, so if later on in Sif Gimel we're matir to write a mezuzah on Chol HaMoed l'tzarich mitzvah, so why aren't we matir to correct an ois in the Sefer Torah, in your personal Sefer Torah, in order to be mekayim the mitzvah of having a kosher Sefer Torah? The Chavetz Chaim doesn't give an answer to this kasha, but I thought it was a very interesting sharitzion. Now I want to draw your attention to the Biur Halacha. Dibur Amaschel v'hafilu lahagia ois achas b'sefer aser. The way I translated the Mechaber, like I told you at the outset of this year, if you look in the Be'er Hagoyla, ois cotton aleph, you'll see that this the words on the Mechaber over here are being drawn straight from a Mishnah Berurah cotton, and the Mishnah Berurah cotton very clearly is discussing a Sefer Torah. So I translated the Mechaber. You're not allowed to correct even one ois in a Sefer Torah. Now, correcting an ois in a Sefer Torah is clearly a Maisa Uman. Nobody is going to dispute that that is a Maisa Uman. Now, even if you'll tell me, well, I don't know, we don't always call a Sefer to be Magia one letter. Sometimes the Shamish in the Shul is good enough that he could be Magia one ois. Yeah, but that's because he became an Uman. It's still the work of an Uman. You're not going to call just any yukel in shul and say, "Hey, can you fix that letter?" Hand him a quill. He doesn't even know which end of the quill to hold. So the person who becomes a magia is also a craftsman. That's also an uman. So writing in the Sefer Torah certainly is a ma'isa uman. But now let's take a look here at the Biur Halacha. The Biur Halacha says, "Hine, af shemikar din zehu me'Mishnah." Even though the Mechaber is clearly coming from the Mishnah in Moed Katan and Yud Ches Amud Beis, V'sham Ma'iril Inyan Sefer Torah, and that Mishnah is clearly discussing a Sefer Torah, Be'emes, truthfully, Kol HaMechaber Bazeh, Af Sefer Acher. Really, the words of the Mechaber apply, and the Mechaber meant to include writing in any Sefer, not just a Sefer Torah. Kigoyin Sifrei Mikra, Chumashim, Gemara, or writing in a Gemara, Ukahai Gavna. Unless you're talking about a sefer that you must correct right now in Chol HaMoed in order to be able to learn it. And if you don't correct it, you're not going to be able to learn. Let's say you have some kind of situation. Nowadays, we almost can't conceptualize such a case. Baruch Hashem, Svarim are so widespread and so benimtza, we can't even conceptualize such a thing. But imagine if you only had one Gemara Psachim, and Daf Yomi is learning Psachim now, and your volume of Psachim, there's a bunch of lines that are rubbed out, and you're in shul, and somebody else has a Psachim Gemara, and his Psachim Gemara is clear. So now you want to sit down and you want to copy over the missing lines from your friend's Psachim Gemara. You want to copy it over into your Psachim Gemara so that later on during the day you'll be able to learn the daf. So that's mutter because that's a davar ovid. We're going to see later on today in Sif Beis that that's called a davar ovid. So that would be mutter. But any other kind of writing is aser. Now, what comes out from this Biur Halacha, and we're going to discuss this more later on in this year. When we learned Sif Aleph inside, I said we're speaking about writing in a Sefer Torah. That's clearly a Maisa Uman, and therefore that's going to be aser if you have a need to do it on the Moed. It's your own personal Tzarech HaMoed. it's also to write in the Sefer Torah, because writing in the Sefer Torah is a Maaseh Uman, and the needs of an individual, even if they're a Tzarech HaMoed, are only mutter to the level of a Maaseh Hedyot. And writing in the Sefer Torah is a Maaseh Uman. It's not a Maaseh Hedyot. So it's also. If we're talking about writing in a Gemara, you might make an argument to me, and you might say, but wait a second, Rabbi Weiss, that's a Maaseh Hedyot. If it's a Maaseh Hedyot, and you need it on the Moed, so it's Tzarchei Moed, and it's a Maaseh Hedyot, so it should be mutter. It's L'tzarech HaMoed, and it's a Maaseh Hedyot. So why isn't it mutter? But we're going to see that this question, whether or not regular writing is considered a Maaseh Hedyot or a Maaseh Uman, is a matter of dispute. It's not so simple to say that stam writing is a Maaseh Hedyot. Stam writing might be considered a Maaseh Uman. We'll have to discuss why that is. Okay. Now let's go weiter. Let's take a look at the Ramah over here. Says the Ramah. And again, we're going to have to read the words of the Ramah very carefully. We're going to have to interject a little bit in between the lines of the Ramah. And I'm going to translate the Ramah and learn Pshat in the Ramah the way the Mishnah Berurah does. Haga. U'letzayrich rabim. When you're doing writing, letzayrich harabim, for public need. Now, over here, we're no longer talking about writing in a Sefer Torah. Over here, we're talking about any other kind of writing that's a tzarich for the rabbim. I don't know. Let's say you're the gabbai. Okay, I'm thinking back to my father, Olav Shalom. My father, Olav Shalom, was the gabbai for many decades in the Svardish Shul in Borough Park, and you have to write down the aliyahs. You want to write down. You had the first days of Yom Tov, and you sold the aliyahs on the first days of Yom Tov. And you have to write down who bought the aliyahs, how much they pledged to buy the aliyahs, and then when they got their aliyah, or they were mechabit somebody else with the aliyah, how much was pledged by the Mishnah Berurah. So you have a lot that you have to write, and it's definitely a tzarech harabim, and it's definitely a tzarech. In this case, it's maybe a tzarech hamoed, because it's for the moed. I have to record what was pledged on Yom Tov. So this is the kind of writing that we're talking about here. We're talking about ordinary writing, not safras. We're not talking about writing in the Sefer Torah. Says the Ramah, or l'tzarech rabim. If you have writing that you want to do for a tzarech for the rabbim, yesh oisrim, there are those that forbid this writing, kol she'enoi l'tzarech hamoed, as long as it's not a tzarech for the moed. And what do these shitas hold? The Mishnah Berurah is going to tell me that this shitas hold that all writing is considered a Maaseh Uman. So how are you going to be mater a Maaseh Uman, even if it's Tzarchei Rabim? Remember, we said that Tzarchei Rabim is not enough to be mater a Maaseh Uman. If you want to be mater a Maaseh Uman for Tzarchei Rabim, it has to be Tzarech HaMoed. Therefore, the Ramah says, if you want to do writing on Chol HaMoed for Tzarchei Rabim, it also has to be Tzarchei Moed. The combination of Tzarech HaMoed and Tzarchei Rabim will allow you to do the Maaseh Uman of writing. So that's the first opinion that the Ramah says. Well, it's Tzarech Rabim. If you want to do ordinary writing, but you're doing it with Tzarchei Rabim on Chol HaMoed, yesh oisrim, there are those that forbid it, kol she'enoi l'tzarech hamoed, if it's not a tzarech hamoed. Because if it's not a tzarech hamoed, very nice that it's Tzarchei Rabim. But Tzarchei Rabim without Tzarech HaMoed is only mater a Maaseh Hedyot. And writing is a Maaseh Uman. And therefore it's not mutter unless it's a Tzarech Rabim. That's the first opinion, the opinion of the Trumas Hadeshen. But the Ramah says, V'yesh matirin. But he brings down a Kolbai and the Beis Yosef who says, no, writing is only a Maaseh Hedyot. Ordinary writing is only a Maaseh Hedyot. And since ordinary writing is only a Maaseh Hedyot, if you're doing it with Tzarchei Rabim, so then even if it's not a Tzarech HaMoed, it's mutter. Because Tzarchei Rabim are mutter on Chol HaMoed in a Maaseh Hedyot, even if it's not a Tzarech HaMoed, even if it's a Tzarech La'achar HaMoed. So you want to write down something on, somebody gave you a check to sponsor Avasu Banim 6 weeks, 8 weeks after Sukkot. So you want to write down which week he wants to sponsor and how much he gave for the sponsorship and who it's Le'ili Nishmas for. So you want to write it down. It's Tzarche Rabbim. You're doing this on behalf of the Rabbim. So it's Tzarche Rabbim, but it's not a Tzarech HaMoed. So according to the first opinion and according to the Trumas Hadeshen, this is Aser, because the writing that you want to do is a Maaseh Uman. It's not a Tzarech HaMoed. You're not allowed to do it. According to the Kolba in the Beis Yosef, it's Mutter, because the ordinary writing is only considered a Maaseh Hedyot, and this is a Tzarech Rabbim, and a Tzarech Rabbim, even if it's not Tzarech HaMoed, is Mutter as a Maaseh Hedyot. Says the Ramah, V'nagu l'hakel b'ksav shalanu, our minig is to be makel, to rule leniently when it comes to our type of writing, our script Hebrew writing, not ksav ashuris, not safris. She'enei Maaseh Uman. We rule leniently, says the Ramah, that our standard issue writing is not considered a Maaseh Uman, and since it's not considered a Maaseh Uman, it's only a Maaseh Hedyot. If you're doing it l'tzarech harabim, even if it's not a tzarech hamayid, it's mutter. So says the Ramah. Now let's go back to the Mishnah Berurah, and I see that I missed Mishnah Berurah Ice Cotton Bays, which is also a very interesting, somewhat complicated Mishnah Berurah. Let's do Mishnah Berurah Ice Cotton Bays. The Mechaber said in Sif Aleph, the beginning of Sif Aleph, that you're not allowed to be magia, you're not allowed to correct even one letter in the Sefer Torah. And we explained the reason is because even though it's a tzarech harabim, but it's not a tzarech hamayid. And what you want to do is a Maaseh Uman. Being magia Sefer Torah, writing safris, that's a Maaseh Uman. You're not allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Bays, Oisachas. You're not even allowed to correct one letter. Kigoin, for example, says the Chavetz Chaim, Lasais Meireish Dalit. We're not talking about even writing a whole letter. We're talking about being magia, correcting one letter. So says the Chavetz Chaim, realize what we're talking about, that's aser. Even if the ois in the Sefer Torah is supposed to be a dalit, and the Sefer accidentally wrote a reish, or something got rubbed out and now it looks like a reish. So what does it take to change a reish into a dalit? It takes a little bit of ink so that the gag, so that the roof of the dalit is sticking out past the leg of the dalit, and now you change the reish into a dalit. So what does it take? You take a quill, a little bit of ink, you make a little dot over there, and punk and shine. You have a dalit instead of a reish. So you might think maybe that's mutter. No, that's not mutter. Because again, you're not going to turn around in shul and ask anybody to do that. You're going to ask an uman to do that. So that's a Maaseh Uman. You're not allowed to do it. Uchahai gavna, or anything similar. Because that's a Maaseh Uman. And even though it's a tzarech harabim, you're not allowed to do it. It's not a tzarech hamayid. But, continues the Mishnah Berurah, and here's where, again, I think you'll see the truth of the way I'm learning pshat in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Chavetz Chaim weiter, Aval lahafrid tevois devukim. Let's say you have two letters in the Sefer Torah that became attached to each other. That passes the Sefer Torah. Ois shahayu rishumai nicker. Or you have a letter in the Sefer Torah where you could still see the letter. You could still read the letter. The roshim, the imprint of the ink, is still there, but it has faded, so it's not nice. Shari lahavir alav kolmas. You're allowed to take a quill, and you're allowed to dip the quill into the ink and pass it over the already existing letter, so you're just making the letter darker. That you're allowed to do. Now, let's stop here for a second and let's analyze. Why is this mutter? Why is this mutter? You see, if you would learn the Mishnah Berurah in Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Aleph, the way I think a lot of people read it quickly and translate it, then you're going to have a very big problem now. If you're going to understand Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Aleph, Lefi she'ein zet tzarech hamayid, being magia Sefer Torah is not a tzarech hamayid, v'loy mikri tzarche rabim, and it's also not tzarche rabim, then why is this mutter? Why is it mutter to go ahead and cut apart two letters? Why is it mutter to pass the quill over a letter that's there and you're just making it darker? Why is it mutter? What are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me it's a Maaseh Hedyot? So what, it's a Maaseh Hedyot? If it's not a tzarech hamayid, and it's not Sarche Rabim, why is it mutter? You're not allowed to do malacha. You're not allowed to do malacha. You're not allowed to do tercha. You're not allowed to do anything on Chol HaMoed. If it's not a Tzarech HaMoed, even if it's a Maaseh Hedyot, you're still not allowed to do it, unless you want to make an argument and you want to say that what the Chavetz Chaim is saying is that, well, this is not a malacha, and it's also ein by shum tercha. There's no tercha at all. It's like removing the earthen mound from the earthen floor that we said earlier you're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed, because it's a malacha she'ein by tercha. No, maybe you could make such an argument. I don't want to. Maybe you could make such an argument. I don't think that's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying. I think what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is the reason you're allowed to split the letters, the reason you're allowed to pass the quill over the letter that's already there is because it's a Maaseh Hedyot. And since it's a Maaseh Hedyot, and this is Tzarchei Rabim, you see, if you want to convince me, you're going to have a very powerful argument to convince me that this is not Tzarchei Rabim. How could you tell me that this is not Tzarchei Rabim? The Sefer Torah is in the shul, it's an Aron Kodesh in the shul, and the Rabbim uses the Sefer Torah. So repairing a Sefer Torah in the shul is definitely Tzarchei Rabim. How is it not Tzarchei Rabim? And I found a raya. The Aruch HaShulchan says it's Tzarchei Rabim. So I'm not coming just from my own head. It's clearly Tzarchei Rabim. So therefore, I think what the Mishnah Berurah is telling me between Ois Katan Aleph and between Ois Katan Beis, what the Mishnah Berurah is telling me is to be magia an Ois in the Sefer Torah you're not allowed to do because that's a Maaseh Uman. And even though this is Tzarchei Rabim, it's not Tzarchei Moed. And in order to be matir a Maaseh Uman, you need the combination of Tzarchei Rabim and Tzarchei Moed. You want to go ahead and you want to cut apart two letters that got attached. You want to pass the quill over a letter that's still visible. So all you're doing is like tracing. You're just covering over what's already there. That's a Maaseh Hedyot. And a Maaseh Hedyot is mutter because even though it's not Tzarech HaMoed, it's still Tzarchei Rabim. And for Tzarchei Rabim, a Maaseh Hedyot is mutter even if it's not Tzarchei HaMoed, even if it's a Tzarech La'achar HaMoed. Okay. Continues the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Beis. The Sefer Torah shehaya chaser tfira ba'amudim. We know that a Sefer Torah is made up of many different uriyos, many different pieces of cloth that have several amudim written on them, and then you take all of them and you sew them together. Let's say what's the word that I just used? What do you call each section? Urea. Let's say one of the ureas, two of the ureas of the Sefer Torah became separated. Now they need to be sewn together. Well, that sewing together of the ureas is also a malacha. So what happens if the Sefer Torah comes apart? Yavakshu ish she'ein lo ma'yochal v'yitverenu. Says the Chavetz Chaim, you should find somebody who Pashat doesn't have what the food to put on the table and pay him. We know that somebody who has to work for his food on Chol HaMoed, he doesn't have food to eat in Chol HaMoed, he's allowed to do any malach at all. So find somebody like that and pay him to go ahead and sew the Sefer Torah back together again. Now we go to Mishnah Berurah Ois Gimel, which goes on the Ramah. And I'll remind you that the Ramah said, Ulitzorich Rabim. If you're writing for Tzarchei Rabim, then we have this machlokes. Is ordinary writing called a Maaseh Uman or is it called a Maaseh Hedyot? If it's called a Maaseh Uman, then the Tzarchei Rabim are only mutter if it's also Tzarchei HaMoed. If ordinary writing is called a Maaseh Hedyot, then Tzarchei Rabim are mutter even if it's not a Tzarech HaMoed. But the Ramah was very vague. All the Ramah says Ulitzorich Rabim. But what kind of writing are we talking about? Are we talking about what the Mechaber was talking about? Writing Safras, writing in a Sefer Torah? Or are we talking about ordinary writing? I told you it's talking about ordinary writing. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Gimel, or the Tzarech Rabim, says the Chavetz Chaim, Loikoi ahaga svarim anal. Over here we're not talking about being magia Sefer Torah, writing Safras like we were speaking about before in the Mechaber. Desham bevadai hu Maaseh Uman, because that is certainly a Maaseh Uman. There's no question that writing Safras is considered a Maisa Uman, everybody knows that that's called a Maisa Uman. So says the Ramah, says the Chavetz Chaim, the Ramah over here can't be talking about writing Safras. The Mechaber was talking about writing Safras. That's a Maisa Uman. Now the Ramah is talking about ordinary writing. And that's why you can have this machlokes. So like Kaya Hagaz Sfar Manal. The Sham Bevadai Hu Maisa Uman. The Mechaber was zicher talking about a Maisa Uman. Va'asal Kulei Alma. And everybody would agree that that's aser, even if you're doing it L'tzarech Rabim, if it's not Tzarech HaMoed, Av Shehu Tzarech Rabim, Kol She'eino L'tzarech HaMoed. If it's not a Tzarech HaMoed, I don't care if it's a Tzarech Rabim. You're not allowed to do a Maisa Uman. Ela rather, Kaya Stam Ksiva. This Ramah has to be talking about ordinary writing, Shehu L'tzarech Harabim, that you're doing L'tzarech Harabim, and that's why we have a machlokes. The Trumas Hadeshen is going to hold that ordinary writing is a Maisa Uman. If it's a Maisa Uman, it's aser unless it's Tzarech HaMoed. The Beis Yosef and the Kolbai are going to hold that ordinary writing is a Maisa Hedyet, and therefore it's mutter if it's Tzarech Harabim, even if it's not Tzarech HaMoed. Ois Katan Dalid, Yesh Oisrim, this is the Trumas Hadeshen. Svir Lahu, the Trumas Hadeshen holds, the Stam Ksiva Maisa Umanhu, that even ordinary writing is a Maisa Uman. Vahayesh Matirin, the Kolbe and the Beis Yosef Svir Lahu, they hold the Chol Ksiva Zulas Sfarim Tfilin and Mezuzas, any writing other than writing Safras, other than writing Stam, ordinary writing, Afilu Ksiva Miruba, even if you're writing, so to speak, block letters, which I assume when he says block letters, what he means over here, even if you're going to go ahead, not the script that we have, you're going to write, so to speak, Ashuris, but you're not writing it in a Sefer Torah, you're not writing it in a mezuzah, you're not writing tefillin, and therefore you're not sitting there diligently, being extremely careful to write everything kehilchasa, you're just using stylized writing. So you're writing Ashuris, have it k'maisa hedyet. The Matirim hold that this is Maisa Hedyet. She'ein adam makpid lichtay vayson kitikunon kolkach. Because okay, looks like we're back up. Sorry for that pause over there. Looks like the stream went down for a moment, but now it seems to be back up. Okay. So the Chavetz Chaim says over here, nice cut and hay, biksav shalanu, hainu biksav mishita. This is the type of writing that he says is called ksav mishita. And in the Sharitzianos Katan Ches, the Chavetz Chaim says, Heim oisios dakois. That's the thin style of script. We're noyig to be mishana our writing. But when we're talking about a case that we're addressing over here, where it's tzarchei rabim, then we don't have to be makpid to be mishana in the share, because I see that there seems to be some type of difficulty going on with the stream. I don't know if the internet connection is weak or something, so I'm going to pause and I'm going to review what's happening in the share, make sure it all came out, and Mirz Hashem, I will pick up a little bit later and I'll post a second video for today's share. So, thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be made against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua to Refuah and Parnasa to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the Bias Gel Tzedek b'mehera v'yameinu. Amen.